There is no struggle too vast, no odds too overwhelming, for even should we fail, should we fall, we will know that we have lived. First in, last out. Told the Hounds is the 8th book in the Malazan series by Steven Erikson, and if you haven't heard, it's my favorite. This guys is the one I've been excited to talk about the most. And I've been excited to talk about it because it is just this absolute behemoth of a book. It is just awesome how this book was written, the way it was written, the themes, the story, the different plots. This is one of those books where I can genuinely say, no hesitation, one of my favorites of all time. This is a top 5 book for me, and I loved nearly every second of it. I've been ecstatic to talk about this one because despite getting some distance from this book, and I'm going to be honest, forgetting definitely certain parts of it, from names to plots to other things, there's just so much about this book that can still be loved. And honestly, I know that this is one of those more controversial Malazan books where, it's very divisive. A lot of people don't like it. They don't like the framing device. They don't like the story. They think it's slower. They think it's a slug to get through. They think it's too philosophical. They think it's too, dark maybe, not epic enough. But for me, I thought this was Steven Erikson's best work. I obviously haven't read Karnak, as you guys can tell that, or the Witness series. But from the main 10, I think that this is by far the best. I think that this is just such a strong book with some of the best plot lines that this series has to offer in its entirety, with some of the best character moments in this series. I think it has some of the best moments, period, in this series. I think the last quarter of this book, the last section especially, is seriously some of the best fantasy I ever read. So before I get into the things that I really like about this book, I want to very quickly touch on the one point that really bothered me. And this is something that has been bothering me about all Malazan books. And I have expressed this opinion on other parts of the internet. And I know people do not like me for this specific opinion, or they don't like this specific opinion that I have. But I am not a fan of plot threads that are left up in the air with not even a close hint of resolution. This is something Steven Erikson does throughout this series, and I understand intellectually that this is a shared universe series. I understand that about Malazan. I understand that there is an entire other author with all of his works. Esselmont has his own thing going on, and a lot of these plot threads are closed off in those books. I understand that. I understand that I'm missing a huge part of the picture that is the Malazan universe. There's still so much for me to explore, and I will. I promise I will. I will get around to them eventually. But what bothers me as a reader is the fact that I am okay with open plot threads if you leave them open on a note that it is satisfactory, but I don't think that this is something Steven Erikson does well at all as an author. I'm just going to be very blunt. There are plots throughout this story and this series where it's just like, why did you open this up at all if there's not even a hint of an answer? It's one thing, I think, for an author to have a plot thread open up in, let's say book 1, and then, close it in book 3, or, you open it up and you leave it to another author. But I think there's a way of going about that where it's satisfactory to read and it makes you want to read more books. Whereas here, I genuinely do not feel that way. I really, and specifically the assassination plot line with the bridge burners in this series, this story specifically, just like, I didn't think it needed to be here. Like, I love the fact that the former bridge burners are here. I love that. I think what happens, what occurs, is great. I think it's engaging. I think that's a very cool storyline to open up. But the fact that we get zero answers as to why it happens or what was going on, or even hints of, hey, maybe you should read this book in order to get these answers, I didn't personally enjoy. And again, I get it. You know, if you start the series, you're supposed to read everything, right? But it's like, if I, as a fantasy fan, didn't have that, like, foreknowledge ahead of time that I'm eventually supposed to read everything, and I just want to read the main 10, and that satisfies me, but I want more answers, I just, like, I don't know. It's a bugaboo for me. It really gets under my skin, and it probably shouldn't. You know, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal. And it's overall not a very big deal compared to how great the series is. But it's one of those issues that just keeps occurring. And in this book particular, I just thought it was egregious because it takes up so much page space and it's not even concluded. Like, the story is not even concluded. You know, it would be one thing if it were like a throwaway chapter, but the plot line takes place over a multitude of chapters. And I feel like with the way it concludes, which is essentially nothing really happens, then, you know, maybe just give the entire plot line to the other author then. Because, like, let's say it's 100 pages of this book would be better without those 100 pages. Like, I love the plot line, but I want the plot line resolved, or at least brought to a place where I can begin to say, okay, I have something to look forward to in other books, and like, just be able to decipher that myself. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of work that Erickson puts on the reader and the fandom and the people who are really big fans and have finished every single story and everything. He puts a lot on the fandom, and I don't know. I personally think that's a failing as an author. I know that's a controversial opinion, but that is my thought. I don't know why the hell Humble Measure did it. I don't know why this plot line exists in this book. But besides that, everything else is great. And I'm sorry that I took so much time to rant about that, but it's just been bothering me about this series. And it's been one of those things where there's just a few things Stephen Erickson does as an author that really makes me just like grit my teeth. And that's one of them. As for everything else, though, guys, I mean, this book cooked. I mean, this is a masterpiece, in my opinion. From the framing device to the plots to the philosophy to the way it begins and ends, I just thought it was great. I going into this, I really did not expect to enjoy the framing device in this book. I was not the biggest fan of Crepe. I had been told that, hey, just to let you know, the framing device here is different. It's different than the last several books. And it's going to be framed by Crepe, who is a character who, it's not that I hate him, but I don't really enjoy him either. He's kind of annoying, and ultimately, controversial opinion, doesn't do a whole lot throughout the series. So this was, going into it, I was like, a little bit hesitant about that. But once it began and I kind of got the flow going and the rhythm, I really enjoyed it. You know, it was way more enjoyable than I thought I was going to. I think my expectations were lower for this book. You know, I really liked Reaper's Gale. I really liked The Bone Hunters. I gave that a 10. I gave Reaper's Gale a 9. I had liked the last two, but going to this one, I was like, I feel like this is going to be another, 7, maybe 8 out of 10. You know, this is going to be one of those lower rated books for me in the Malazan universe. I'm not gonna love this one as much, but I was totally wrong, and I kind of wish I didn't have that thought going into it, but I'm glad I did because of how much I enjoyed it. I felt like the framing device was brilliant, and it's so Shakespearean. It's so odd and weird and different, but I just really enjoyed it. It's such a good way of having this book written, and I kind of wish Erickson did it more. I wish he experimented with the framing device and the prose more throughout this series, because I think it stands out more than how he traditionally writes. That's my opinion. Let's talk about some of the plots, especially the ones that I really distinctly remember. Starting with a smaller one, but one that tugged on my personal heartstrings. I didn't cry, but I got, this is the closest I got throughout this entire series of crying, and that's Harlow. Harlow is a little boy of, I want to say Stony Monachus, but I don't think that's correct. But I know that she was in Memories of Ice. I know that Murillo and her train kids in this book for swordsmen, but I for the life of me cannot remember her name. But anyways, Harlow is this little boy, and he's, I think, 9 or 10, if I remember correctly, maybe 12. And his older younger brother, Sneed, I feel like that's what his name was, Sneed. They're like, they go out, they are gathering fire or something for their neglectful parents. I mean, they're neglectful, so I don't even think that's like me being funny. And Sneed is like this sociopathic, just like, and I'm sorry for the language, but just a dickhead. Just an awful dickhead. And he knocks out Harlow, and then Harlow gets like pressed into like being a child mine shaft worker, essentially. And it's this horribly depressing storyline where Harlow is forced into this horrible like concentration level, just like working till he dies, essentially. And it's so sad. And I'm not laughing because it's funny, but it's just like it's just one of those, like, looking back on it, it's such a horribly depressing storyline. And like his mom, like, she didn't care about him at all until he went missing, and then she has like a mental breakdown. So Murillo goes down and tracks him, and Murillo ends up dying. And oh, dude, this entire plot line just pissed me off. This plot line, and I mean that in a good way, by the way. It just, like, I was so emotionally charged throughout this entire plot line with Murillo and Harlow and what he goes through. And Harlow meets this other little boy, and they become friends, and Harlow does all these things, and he's just this sweet little guy. But for some reason, being a sweet little guy in the Malazan world attracts you to like just the worst people imaginable. And there's this other character who's like this older boy who's like a bully, and he like, Harlow wants to try and escape, and with this other little boy that he befriends, and the evil little boy like tracks him down and like harasses them and does all sorts of things, and the good little boy that Harlow's friends with ends up like falling and dying like very slowly. And oh, it's like so depressing. It is so deeply depressing, and that was the part that I almost cried at. And then when Harlow finally does make it out and is saved with the help of Crocus, dude, and how it ends with he says the other little boy's name is like, this is love, or I'm loved now. Oh, dude, I was so close to tears. I was genuinely, I was this close to tears. I mean, this plot line was just devastating to me, just absolutely gut wrenching. And I think that this plot line, controversial opinion, maybe, I don't think so, is actually a better example of Erickson's ability to emotionally manipulate his audience than Beak ever could have been. This is so much better because he does. I don't know. I don't know why I like this story better. I don't know why resonate with me more emotionally. Maybe it's because it's a child. But I felt like this was so much more sincere than Beak, which I complained about in the last video, so I won't do here. But yeah, this plot line, dude, it hurt. It hurt so bad. What else happened in this book? A lot happened, and I want to talk about Black Coral, Namander, and the Dying God plotline, at least from what I remember. This plotline was weird, and I mean that in a good way, because Namander is one of the Tist Andi, and he's essential. If I remember correctly, he's one of the sons of Anomandarake, and I think he's one of the first sons of Anomandarake, and they are trying to come back to Black Coral, but they stumble upon this cult of the Dying God. And what is happening here essentially is that the Dying God, who is like the soul of two other or three other people, come back to life from Gardens of the Moon. I don't remember what his name is, but he was the one who died with Tattersail, who died in place of Tattersail in the first book. And he like, his plan is to like try and like take over Black Coral essentially, I think. And he like hates the Tist Andi, I think. I'm not really actually sure what entirely happened in this plotline. It was just weird. It was like a really weird thing. Anyways, they stumble upon this cult. That's the important part. And this one dude attempts to kill the Dying God, and he gets possessed, and all sorts of just really funky things happen. But why I went to quick focus on this was the fact that I thought that this was so esoteric and weird. This felt to me like reading just like some like cosmic horror level stuff. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how else to describe it. This felt just like cosmic horror, like the way that it happens, and the way that the Dying God was like manipulating Namander's the leader, and how he was attempting to like take over and subdue people, and like wanting to take over. I thought that it was so weird, and how it tied into the Seer Domain plotline was really weird. And I kind of want to very quickly talk about that point before I talk about the plot line I thought that was the most interesting, and the end, which is epic. The Seer Domain is this character who worked previously for the Panyan Domain, and he was like a general or a priest of some sort, but now he lives in Black Coral after seeing the Panyan Domain collapse at the walls or whatever. And people are not fans of this dude, and he's just like trying to like live life in Black Coral. And then, you know, all the really funky stuff starts happening with the Dying God, and he goes out and basically tries to challenge the Dying God using Itkovian from Memory's Vice, who has now ascended to godhood. And there's just this like philosophical debate. I essentially think of this plotline as a philosophical debate of forgiveness, and, you know, is forgiveness enough, or should we demand redemption? You know, if a God is just all forgiving and all it can do is forgive, then is that God just? Because is it not more important to ask for redemption and make people work for, you know, a better future and improve themselves? Or is it better to just forgive and forget? Because maybe forgiving and forgetting is playing into these people's vices and lifestyle choices that are horrid. And I just thought that, like, at least, like, I could not tell you exactly what this plot line was or what it meant, but I thought on a philosophical level that it was brilliant. And I think that's the important part, really, because again, it was so weird, it was so occult and so different. And honestly, my memory is super vague, but I just thought that this entire kind of philosophical musing of, is forgiveness enough? Is a all forgiving God, like, really truly someone who deserves worship? Or, is it redemption? And what does that look like? Now, those plot lines, as good as they are, don't touch the rest of this book. This book has a plot line and an ending that I would label as nuts, crazy. So what happens here is that inside Animander Rake's sword is Dragnapor. Chaos is catching up to the cart where Draconis is, and all the people who have been killed over the years by Dragnapor are. And it's, I guess, theorized that Chaos, if it catches up and kills these people and takes over the wagon, that it'll have access into the domain of darkness that the Tist Andy are from. I don't really something Ghislaine, but I don't really remember. That's not the important part. The important part is that the people in Dragnapor are fleeing, and that Draconis, one of them, realizes that they have to essentially fight Chaos in order to, not have, like, their souls ripped apart, and not give up, Mother Dark and the realm of darkness. They have to fight Chaos. So they do that, but at the exact same time, Animander Rake has, with the help of Shadow Throne and the literal Lord of Death himself, Hood, shown up at, and this is like the really, really stupidly crazy part. They show up at Darujistan outside the city all at once. First off, the Hounds of Shadow attack Darujistan, and they start causing, like, mass death and chaos in order to summon Hood, who is taken to the physical realm, who then fights Animander Rake, who kills him in order to have Hood take over the army in Dragnapor and summon an army of the dead to fight Chaos itself. And it is seriously the most insane, crazy, stupid plotline that has ever happened. Because, first of all, what are we even talking about? Second of all, when Hood shows up in Darujistan, it is probably the funniest and most epic scene in any fantasy book I've ever read, because he shows up and people just start dying. Like because he's the Lord of Death, people just start dying by, like, the hundreds, if not thousands. And the sequence of events and how Erickson chose to write it, I just thought was brilliant. Because there's this scene where this dude who's, like, I think he's, like, some sort of pervert, is, like, doing perv stuff, and then he ends up, like, dying doing the perv stuff. And then another dude who is, like, cuckoo in the head, but not really, he's not actually insane, falls through the floor and, like, kills himself on, like, a cane. And it is seriously funny. Like, it is so, like, the comedic timing is just genius. And it's so epic because, Hood is this character who we've seen referenced time and time again, and we've seen him, but now he's among the mortals, and, he's causing all this mass death, and you think that, Animander and Hood are going to have this cool, really, really cool face-off, and then Animander just, like, one-shots him and just kills him instantly. And then we turn around, and then Animandareg's dead, basically, by the hands of, I don't remember his name, but he has the sword that Animandareg used to have, and Animandareg essentially forced him to win in order to kill himself, to put himself in Dragnapur, so that he could help return Mother Dark, which was essential to having the Tistandi come back into power in order to fight the dying god. So everything connects, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm sorry, I deeply apologize that I don't remember this plot as well as I want to. But what's crazy to me is how Steven Erikson just manages to use all these different threads throughout this plot and throughout this story to connect with one another. And he does it in such a grandiose and epic way that you just can't help but want to yell when it happens and when it all connects and when it all comes together. And there's just so many moments in this book that I was laughing and I was close to tears from crying and that I was just hyped about. And especially the last section, I think I stayed up all night to finish the last section. It was just one of those things where it was just so good, because throughout this is really framed in a way that it feels like it's a Shakespearean tragedy. It's very dark, it's very bleak. The philosophy is, this debate of, is forgiveness good enough? The Tistandi are central characters in this plot, and if you know anything about the Tistandi, they're deeply depressing characters. And using them as this kind of what happens to a society that can't really die, but no longer has a reason to live. It's just so brilliant. It's just so good. And it's just one of those things where it's I just loved it. I just loved this book. I just thought that it was so awesome. The bridge burners make a return in this, and they're resurrected and they fight the tide of chaos, and there's just this heartbreak that happens throughout this story, and there's this great sense of humor that I've found to be the best in the series. And there's also this great action sequence during the final section, and there's just this tragedy that just seethes from this book. And it's so obvious and so clear to me that Erikson was going through loss. And I felt that, as a reader, I think it's incredible when an author can really put everything on the line and really emote through his works. And I think that's what Erikson does to a T. He does it perfectly here. And I wish I could discuss specific plot lines in better detail. I wish I had recorded this, in truth, right after I finished it so I could remember more. But even months after finishing this book and just sitting here and just kind of recalling what I do, I just remember how incredible of an experience this book was. And just the deep emotional and just almost soul reaction I had to this was it was so profound. I could be like, oh, the pacing could have been better, or these certain sequences really bothered me. I talked about the thing that really just bugged me in this book. But all of the things, all the flaws in this book are overwhelmed. They're overtaken by how genuinely epic this book is. And I mean epic in a sense of Iliad, Odyssey epic. Just one of those books where you can see that he's not just drawing upon the current culture of fantasy where it's got to be Lord of the Rings, or it's got to be Brandon Sanderson, or it's got to be First Law. No, he's drawing upon all these great stories throughout human history, and he's doing something new with it, and he's writing this tale of tragedy and triumph, of deep heartbreak, and this great love, and how humanity is and I say humanity not as in actual humans, but humanity as in the sense of all creatures who are intelligent and self-aware, a humanity that is universal, in such a brilliant way that I do not even have the proper words to describe it. Somebody much smarter than me can probably analyze what he's trying to do with and talk about using the Tistandi and the human side of the story to discuss the human condition, or discuss humanity, or discuss tragedy, or discuss loss. But what I can tell you is that this is a great book. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not someone who analyzes fantasy. I'm just someone who has a passion for these things and tries to share that as best as I can. And I do try to be as articulate as possible, although I don't always achieve that. But this is just one of those books that it truly left me speechless. I could not believe it. It's one of those rare books where I can just genuinely say 10 out of 10, no issues. This is one of those books where it's so good that even if you hate Malazan, I want you to read Malazan to get to this point. It is genuinely just one of those books I'll think about for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those rare novels, fantasy or otherwise, where it's just brilliant. It is just, and I don't like using this word, but it's just perfect. Like, even if it's not, it's just perfect. It's just, it ascends. There are good writers, there are great writers, there are phenomenal writers, and then there are writers that can achieve this sense of just grandiose and fulfillment that no one else can. I think there are a lot of great writers in fantasy. I think there are a lot of good writers in fantasy. I think there are even some phenomenal writers in fantasy. But then there are writers in fiction and in fantasy where I think I just say that is how fantasy ought to be written. And Steven Erikson is just one of those writers. He writes fantasy, especially in Told the Hounds, how it ought to be written. This isn't just great because it's this grand scope and epic narrative and there's so many cool characters and cool moments and cool magic, but it's great because it's so human. There is this universal thing that all humans go through. We all experience loss. We all experience, a love and what it feels like to be abandoned, and what does it feel like to be fulfilled, and all these other things that Steven Erikson explores in this book. And it's just, you know what I mean? Like, it's just such a great book that it's hard to explain how great it is. It's one of those fictional works that ascends, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of good fantasy books out there. I review them all the time. There's a lot of great fantasy books out there. I review them all the time. There's some phenomenal fantasy books out there, and I try to read and review them. And this is just one of those ones where it's so good that it's like there's just not proper verbiage in my vocabulary to explain why. You know what I mean? This is just one of those rare experiences in literature where I sit back and I'm awed and I'm thankful for the fact that I got to read it. You know what I mean? Like, there's just some books and some series I've read out there where I'm incredibly grateful that I got back into fantasy and I got back into reading fiction, because not necessarily that it changed my life, although I think there's an argument to say it has, but just the fact that I got to just read this beloved work, and a work that I think, at least, in my very personal and humble opinion, just screams, that this is art. You know what I mean? And I think that's the greatest compliment I can give it. I think there's a lot of fantasy out there that I genuinely, I very much enjoy. And I do think of writers as artists. I really do. But there are just some authors out there where you can tell that they put everything into it. They put their soul into it. There's just a level of passion there that is not always there in other fantasy works. And honestly, it's just an inspiration to me. You know what I mean? Like I can only hope that I can one day write a story that's not as good as Malazan. I don't think I could ever achieve that, but that I can just express my soul through, and people can recognize that I'm expressing my soul through. They can recognize my passion for my craft and my art that I'm attempting to put out there. So yeah, Told Hounds, it's great. Great's an understatement. Masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of a novel, and I just like. If for some reason you watch this video, which you probably shouldn't because it's filled with spoilers, but if you watched it anyways, and you're thinking, "Wow, that sounds really good," you know what? Maybe I have to try. Please do. This is one of those books where it's just like, I want people to read it. I just want everyone I know to read it because of how good it is and how much it resonated with me. And, I understand why this does not work for everyone, but for me, it's the book that clicked the most for me in this series. It's the one that I think I had the most serious emotional reaction to throughout. It's the one that I think represents Malazan the best. I know other people will say The Crippled God or Dust of Dreams is better. And there's a good argument for those two books. But I think that this perfectly encapsulates everything great about Malazan. I think it just perfectly encapsulates the spirit of what Erikson is going for as a writer. I really do. I think it's just everything great about Malazan. I think it just highlights how great of an author he is. And I think even like conveniently, it also highlights parts of his art that is not perfect. And I think it's important to always say, like, a book does. I don't believe in perfect books. I don't think that exists. But I do believe that sometimes in order to get to that 10 out of 10 for me, you have to have a few flaws that shows that you're still human and that you're still trying to write the best book you can and you're trying to pour your passion into it. And I think Erikson does that here. And honest, it's just so good. It is just so genuinely phenomenal. And I know I'm just kind of ranting and raving about how great this book was, but that's just how I feel about it. Like, just genuinely, I just think it is that level of good, and it's going to be a 10 out of 10. That score for me has not changed one bit. It's just such a good book, and I'm excited to review the other two eventually. I'm going to try and review Dust of Dreams tomorrow. But this one is by far the best, I think. It's brilliant.